defines our denomination, which is something that I greatly appreciate. When I was raised in the Presbyterian Church, and when I was young, I had a wonderful teacher who I think a lot of us are almost like wishing we were Jewish in a certain kind of way in terms of our fascination with scriptural reading and reinterpretation. And this teacher of mine, we were asked to memorize a bunch of Bible verses, but I remember that, as an 8-year-old, we would get into some pretty intense discussions about what the potential meaning of the Bible verses we were memorizing was. And I think that kind of set me off on this direction that's not unlike literary interpretation, where you're really working to find meaning through reading, rereading, engaging with history and the broader context of text. And so it's a very rich tradition in terms of its willingness to really investigate what scripture means. So I hope that's helpful.
Great, okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about either of the panelists' worldviews? I don't have any questions in the chat yet, so and you're welcome to speak too. We do have a little bit of a smaller group too, so does anyone have any questions before we move forward? No? Okay. Well, then I guess we'll just jump right into how their worldview shapes their position on care for creation and sort of this moral and ethical responsibility to care for the earth. So, Jason, if you wanna begin? Oh, you're not. You are muted. Hold on. There you go.
Good. Okay. So, for me, it all starts first and foremost with concern, care for other living creatures. I don't want to be speciesist. I've read a lot of Peter Singer, and I believe a lot in considering not just humans, despite me being a humanist, but also anything that could suffer. I think we sort of have a moral obligation to reduce that suffering as much as possible. And that can be done in multiple ways when talking about concern for the natural world. One, directly, individual animals, we can do our best to not do any harm to them, but also in the larger sense that the earth has a direct impact on all of these creatures, and how not just individually, but as a species and as ecological communities, they can maintain wholeness and sustain themselves. And then also going back to the humanist side, obviously, we have many things that we gather from the natural world. And there's a long history of conservation ethics associated with this, since I'm a biologist. John Muir had a preservationist ethic, which was sort of the idea that it has value in itself, the natural world. And that can sort of be broken up into two things. And one is that almost in a religious sense, we have a duty to preserve this because there's a spiritual quality to it in itself. And the other sense is almost also human focused, but human focused on the spiritual sense that people need that spiritual connection, and they can get it through the natural world. And so when we destroy that, we destroy part of ourselves almost. And so I think there's a lot to be said in that, and I appreciate parts of that. And then there's the human aspect in terms of a utilitarian ethic, that we get all these resources, the air we breathe, the water we drink, all the food we eat, our shelter, all our materials obviously come from a natural world that must be sustained. And if we use it too quickly, we run out of these things and we can't go on, and people suffer, and it's terrible. And so we sort of have a duty there. And and when you add all these things together, it sort of gets to be like Aldo Leopold's land ethic, which is the idea that you have to care about all these things, and you have to realize how interconnected they all are. And you have to think long-term, and you have to think interconnectedly and sort of multidisciplinary about this disciplinarian. I'm going to stop there. You know what I'm saying? In terms of how they all work together. And if you lose focus on that, all aspects of it will suffer. So in addition to the the respect we need to have for individual creatures and the whole, and humans and the different aspects of what we take from the world, whether it be spiritual, recreational, resource-wise, all these things are tied together. And so we have a duty to maintain them in a healthy way.
Great, thank you. Okay, Carla, do you want to just jump in with your perspective then on care for creation?
Yeah, so I'm going to say that I'm definitely on the trajectory of being a seeker in this regard. I don't think I have drilled down on any of the answers. Sorry, I've got my entourage in the background. I don't think I've drilled down on any of the answers at this moment, but I will say that I think the ethical challenge of this moment is a lot of what is driving me to try to understand more about our faith traditions and what they have to say about this right now. We're in a very difficult situation where we have really just exquisite detail about the myriad ways in which our species is destroying the life support system that we depend on. So we have excellent information about what we're doing wrong. We know what we need to change. And for my entire life, I'm 40 years old, I feel like we've been coming up short in terms of translating that exquisite information that we have into any kind of action. And, you know, this is something that I've been clued into since I was probably like 10 or 11 years old. And honestly, trying to understand how we can know all of these things and not be driven to action by it is really runs me up against my limit of my faith, of my understanding about our capacity as humans to organize and to change things. It puts me in great doubt about our future and our capacity. And so I've really been on a quest, and I think it's bigger than Protestantism or Christianity. I've been on a quest to try to understand what ethically, morally, organizationally we have to give to try to meet this moment that we're at in some kind of honest way, because I feel like for most of my life we haven't been honest about it. And so this has really kind of driven me on quite a quest. As I said, I was raised as a Presbyterian, and so in this quest I've returned to my own faith tradition as kind of the place where I feel like I have the most capacity to make change, because it's a place that I understand. And excuse me for 1 second. Can you guys, Jason, can you take over for one quick second? I'll be right back.
Okay, I think I'm back. I'm not muted anymore. Yeah, so I can go back to my personal appreciation. So I talked a little bit about the recreational and spiritual side. So the reason I'm a biologist is because I've been going out into nature since I was a kid, and I've developed a really strong passion and connection with nature. And I think it's really good it's kind of goes back and forth, my building of empathy for nature, and nature sort of gives it back to me. So that's one aspect of what I was talking about before. But if you're ready, Carla, you can come back in.
Thank you for taking over for me. I'm sorry, everyone. We're all working from home with kids, so it's just a unique position to be in. So thank you for your patience. Thank you, Jason. I guess the sort of big picture story that I wanted to tell is that after maybe 20 years of not being in a church attendee, in like 2015, 2016, I started going to church again. And there were two big reasons for me in doing this. First, I needed something to do with my son, who was 7 or 8, that wasn't playing video games on the weekend. And I was, I think I was craving the idea of something that was community focused and bigger than so much of activity for children is focused on our children's kind of individual actualization, and not on sort of where they fit into a community. And so I think I was looking for something community focused that my kid could be involved in. And then the second thing that brought me back was just the challenge of the 2015-2016 presidential election. And at that time I was in Los Angeles.
Hey, Mom.
You gotta listen to me talk, okay? At that time I was in Los Angeles, and we were surrounded by homelessness, and I was working in public health and dealing with kind of just the looming fears related to climate change and climate disruption at a time when things already felt very unstable. And going to church again was incredibly powerful. And when I came back to the Presbyterian Church after 20 years of being gone, one of the things that was most faith-giving to me about what I found is that a lot of work had happened to try to improve engagement with creation care in the time I'd been gone. And so both the sort of national governance of the Presbyterian Church USA was making strong moves to try to understand their position about fossil fuel investment, as well as the local congregations were adopting all kinds of plastic-free strategies, tree planting initiatives, and sort of powerful local change.
Someone please give
You gotta
me an
listen.
orange.
You gotta listen. And I think that was just incredibly faith-giving to see that this communitarian tradition, based on its local governance, could change and sort of modify itself to rise to some of the challenges that are coming up right now. And so, I think that in many ways, Christianity struggles to incorporate the many diverse challenges of our moment. And the wisdom of Christianity is very focused on the human, on how we should treat our fellow humans. And so there's a little bit of a stretch related to how we should treat creation more broadly within our theology. But I think that I have faith, and I'm impressed by the work of so many people that's been going on for decades to try to figure out how we can connect the wisdom about how we treat each other with the wisdom about how we treat our broader ecosystem. And it's not necessarily the easiest theological splice in many ways. The assumptions about the natural world that were built into or baked into Judeo-Christianity in our scripture, it was just a different set of parameters than the ones we're currently living with. But I'm given great faith by the way many people are trying to modify their understanding of our faith in order to encompass the challenges that we have right now. And I think we really need to focus on that because our lives are already greatly impacted by climate disruption, and the lives of our children will be very disrupted. And so they need a framework and a moral understanding of where they fit into this whole big crazy picture. And in a way, we really can't work fast enough on having these conversations about where meaning is, what the world might look like in a post-human context, and what that means to all of us. So thank you. Sorry for the ongoing disruptions.
Thank you, Carla. Oh. Okay, I guess she's running off again. Do any of our participants have a question for Jason right now that we can segue into? And you're welcome to speak. Like I said, we do have a smaller group, and I know that there's a lot of isolation going on right now, and we want to feel more connected. So please feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question if you have one.
Hello? Hello? Hi, my name is Jean.
Hi, who's this?
Jean Morrissey. And
hello, Jean.
Hi. I understand doing things on a local level, but I don't think that's enough. And I don't know how to stop fracking, for one thing, or, the pipelines and things like that. The real people that are abusing the world. I think that everybody here is, doing their share with recycling and stuff, but there's more. And I don't know how to handle that, how to deal with that.
I'll talk about that a little bit. And I think that's a question that I wonder about I think we all wonder about. It's hard not to feel absolutely powerless in the face of the economic and extractive forces that are creating these problems. I had the pleasure last year of going to Washington, D.C. with the Citizens Climate Lobby. The Citizens Climate Lobby, if you haven't heard about it, is an organization that's very focused on making our existing democracy, with all of its warts, work for environmental protection. And it is a relentlessly positive group where you basically are matched up with your local elected representatives at the national level, and you develop individual relationships with them and start trying to create a bipartisan climate solution. And I was very fascinated that there was a kind of a religious connection when I went to the big lobby day where the lobbyists from all over the US come to Washington, D.C. to talk to their electeds. There was actually a dedicated time when all kinds of different religious groups had tables, and they talked. There's a Presbyterian call where we talk about lobbying for change, for a price on carbon, for a carbon fee and dividend, as we call it. And there's also a Jewish one, and there's a secular humanist one. And I think the thing that was powerful to me about that is this idea that so many other people have hit this point with their faith where they feel like they need to be kicking it into high gear and figuring out how they're really going to make that very profound change. Now, but without getting into politics, there are a lot of structural challenges in our democracy that mean that we don't make much progress on those issues within the context of democracy. And so I think when democracy isn't working for you, that's when you need to protest. And I believe strongly in that. I have helped to organize a variety of climate protests. It's unfortunate that our ability to participate in certain forms of protest is being increasingly limited by state government. And so we have some challenges in that regard, but I think it is absolutely part of our moral imperative when democracy isn't working for us to get loud and to say what's right. I don't know that it will inherently solve the problem, but I think it's part of our moral obligation.
Thank you. I also have another comment, if I might.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering, what I'm seeing with this coronavirus is that there'll be many changes in our environment very shortly. I think a lot of people will be staying home and doing their, thing from home. I think that'll help a great deal with the environment. I think it's going to be, yeah, there's a lot of sadness and a lot of grief and a lot of yuck going on. But I think that ultimately the good will come out of it as far as the environment is concerned. I'm hoping. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to that, Jason, but I've been reading a lot about, a lot of people kind of trying to spin out or play out what this means in the context of the environment, and also within the context of our trust of government, our belief in science. And I think that I'm having a hard time feeling hopeful at this moment. However, I think that there are certain things that are going to come out of this. I do think what we're learning is that you trust science at your peril. You underfund or cut resources to scientific research, to administrative agencies at your peril. And you treat people inequitably and underpay your critical workforce that stocks grocery stores and takes care of the elderly at your peril. And I hope that we will, I think it's very important for us to start talking, to contact our electeds about the changes that we hope to see coming out of this. If it's a more universal approach to healthcare, I think it's important for us to start talking with them right now while we're in this crisis about why that is so important. So that's my take. I think if we want that better future, we need to start in on it immediately.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there. I think there's two aspects in which this might do some good, even though it's obviously a horrible situation we're in. One is it's directly going to reduce our carbon footprint, and pretty significantly through terrible circumstances, but it's probably as big of a jump as we could hope in the immediate future in that sense. And the other one is hopefully it'll be an impetus for change. I mean, crisis is when, you know, bold, fast change happens. And I agree with Carla that, you know, there's a lot of thought on how seriously we should take science and scientists and their warnings. And hopefully also many other social aspects like healthcare. And all these things are interconnected. And so I hope this is a real impetus for change here, because if not, I think we'll lose an opportunity to learn from this and to put ourselves on a better path.
I agree. Definitely.
I received a message in the chat. We also have another one of our board of directors here, Dr. Fatima Lamdi, and she'd like to offer a little bit of insight into care for creation from an Islamic perspective. Fatima, are you there?
Yep.
So please share your comments. Fatima, are you there? Hello? Fatima, are you there? I think you were muted. Okay, you were muted, so go ahead.
Yeah, do you hear me? I just wrote a comment about, with all the respect to Jason, but I want to just bring in, kind of relate to other religions about what does the Islam say about animals and keeping our ecosystem. And like there is a famous saying from the Prophet that whoever person who planted a tree will be a continuous charity for him until the hereafter. This is just to encourage people to, like, you know, to keep the nature and enhance or reinforce the purpose of the nature to people. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot you can't see the video. Everyone's giving you a thumbs up.
Yeah. Also, Islam teaches a human that all creations of God, whether it's animal or plants, or it's all, they were created for a certain purpose in this life. And they all, like, we can benefit from each other. Everything in this world or in this earth is for a purpose. So this is just to encourage people to, like, either an animal or a plant. The existence of all these are for, like, a human being. They serve a certain purpose on this earth. This is what I have just kind to relate to what Jason was saying and Carla, and bring the Islamic perspective in. As I see, there is nobody from the Muslim background. Hello.
Yeah, great. Sorry, everyone's muted, so sorry for the delay. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have a question, I think, for both of our panelists and even for you, Fatima. I'm wondering, I think, given that everyone is so concerned with how we deal with this imminent crisis of COVID-19, how do we balance, our focus on containing the virus, but also having concern for more of this existential crisis of climate change. And I mean, I've seen several memes. I think even maybe Carla has posted one about how, you know, we're all very, very focused on in our attention on addressing COVID-19, but we have this much larger crisis that's, you know, creeping up on us, and we don't want to lose sight of that amidst all of this. So I guess how does, from your worldview or even just your own, you know, opinion, how do we balance, you know, our focus on addressing COVID-19, but then also not forgetting that we have to be aware of climate change and we have to continue to address that as well?
I keep talking first, so I'll let Jason go if he wants to talk.
Sure, I have no preference. I enjoy listening to you, and I agree with a lot of what you say. So sometimes we're just repeating some of the same ideas, but I don't think they're necessarily, they conflict with each other because of the time spans. Hopefully the coronavirus will end within a short amount of time. And although climate action needs to happen immediately, if anything's going to move us in the right direction, I would hope it's the coronavirus, because again, this is a crisis where people are rethinking everything and how they view science and funding and warnings about, you know, where we're going. And so, you know, a lot of conflicts pull from each other because there's limited resources and a limited attention span. But hopefully this one actually focuses us in on climate and bigger issues of sustainability. So I don't see them as conflicting. I think we just need to take the energy that we have right now in our focus and direct it towards climate, which is a bigger and more devastating issue than coronavirus. It's just going to be not as time sensitive, and it's going to be spread out. And you know, we as people have a really bad track record and natural ability for understanding long-term risks and pain, and looking past ourselves and our individual lives, and for good and bad reasons, some selfish, some just because it's hard to live every day. And so to think about the big picture and multiple generations down the road is tough, but we need to do it. And if this doesn't help us get there, I'm not sure what will, but hopefully this isn't our last chance, but hopefully we take advantage of it anyway, so it won't matter. We'll act soon. Do you have thoughts on this, Carla?
Yeah, so a perspective that I've been thinking about a lot with this, you know, I live in Oxford, I'm part of the university community, and, you know, I have kids, so I've witnessed a lot what it's been like for our college age kids and our young kids to have schools shut down, and to have, you know, all of their senior projects deferred indefinitely, and all of this kind of, you know, the real and true sacrifice that we're asking for from our young people right now, who statistically are impacted, and we're all part of the same community, but who, you know, they're sacrificing to some extent their educations and a variety of other opportunities for the health of our community. And I think one thing that will be important rhetorically is to start talking about the generational justice issue of climate change. So this is going to flip, you know, right now there's a lot that our elders can do to limit the damage, to increase the prospects for a healthy climate or a livable climate for our young people. And I think it's going to be very important coming out of this for us to say, just as you said, Jason, that our climate challenge is as big and bigger than our COVID-19 challenge, and that it's imperative for us to be, for all of us older people to be, you know, honoring the future of our young people by taking the climate challenge as seriously as we're taking COVID-19. And I think we need to have a serious discussion about whether we bring back industries like air travel or bail that industry out, whether we bring back tourism on the scale that it was happening, whether we really want to keep going with cruise ships, you know, and those things are kind of even, you know, discretionary compared to some of the other more important investments that we could be making in a more coherent society. And so to me, there is an intergenerational justice issue that is related to this that we need to be thinking about. And then just, I think again, the opportunity to really trust the science. You know, we've been doing, I think, a great job in our local Presbyterian congregation, has been offering worship online with, you know, incredible creativity and grace. And I think we're seeing that in all kinds of congregations. We're so fortunate to have the technology that we have right now to facilitate this kind of change. And I hope that it is opening our eyes to the possibilities of using technology more creatively to have this, you know, a future that is hopefully less carbon intensive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I wonder if we'll be able to continue this momentum in our response to crisis, or if actually that once this is all over, if this is just going to actually have the reverse effect, and we're going to all be flying. I mean, as you were saying with like, are we going to continue to reduce air travel and our use of cruise ships and different types of tourism? I mean, it could have the opposite response too, right? Everyone could just be like, I'm going to go take, now I'm going to travel even more. So I think, Fatima, did you have a comment? Did you want to add to what Jason had?
Just, I hate to interrupt, but I don't know.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I wanted to leave it there for the people or the participant to read, but yeah, I don't mind to share it with them. I think the climate change needs some support from religious leaders. I think we are not doing enough. Like being an active, like a member at the Islamic Center, I don't see a lot of work that we do. We can do more. I don't know if you understand what I mean. I think for like the religious leaders and communities, people who attended churches and mosques and synagogues, like they make it part of their agenda. The issues they care about that they discuss in day, like on Sunday or whatever in the religious services, I think will make a big difference.
Absolutely. Do either of you have anything to add to that? No? Okay.
I would agree. And I know some religious backgrounds have a sort of adversarial relationship. They think that nature is almost only human-centered and for our purposes and nothing else. That's a small minority of religious backgrounds, but some share that belief. But there's also an argument to help that too, that if you just look at the impact to people in itself, which is a lot of what we're talking about, it makes sense to act on this. And even with so I'm a little bit of a tangent, but with the coronavirus, people are talking about sacrificing the economy to save lives, which by the way, I don't think should be an argument. You save lives every time. But as well, what we're doing right now with social distancing is going to help the economy. The impact on the economy would be much, much worse if we weren't social distancing because of the lives lost, the fact that we would still need to quarantine, that everything was jumbled. And so even from a perspective that only cared about profits, the right thing to do is to act on this. It's the same thing with the climate issue. There's many banks and independent groups that have calculated the cost of climate change just in terms of money and nothing else. And absolutely, it will cost the world financially trillions of dollars over decades, without a doubt. In addition to, and that's the bigger point, many, many lives lost due to lack of resources and conflict over resources and all sorts of different things that people don't think of when they think of climate change unless they've really looked into the studies and really understand how everything is connected. And so the more religion can help with this, no matter where you're coming from, the better for everyone. And I think there is a lot of room to grow there. And so I really appreciate Fatima's comment on that.
Yeah, and this is I'll just add, I think that's terribly important. I think that there's a lot of hand-wringing, at least in mainline Protestant denominations, about why we are losing membership and why we're losing attendance, why so many people find themselves in the category of no religion or nones when they're asked about their religion. And I think in many ways it's because the critical ethical dilemmas of our moment are not being reflected in what people are experiencing in their faith communities. This is the critical ethical dilemma of our moment. And if you're a young person and you're not hearing this addressed from a moral perspective in your faith community, you won't come back. It won't be relevant to what matters to you. And I think that there's a lot of organizations that are catching on to this. And so I was gonna go ahead and post a few links. Interfaith Power and Light has been on this for a really long time, doing a great job. Green Faith has a wonderful step-by-step program that you can use in your faith community to declare a climate emergency in your congregation. And they've done this wonderful prefab where they actually pull out the scriptural references and have kind of like a facilitated meeting that you can run to do this, and then kind of like follow-up steps that you can take. They're also offering free screenings of The Human Element during Earth Week, which is coming up, which is a great documentary about these issues we're discussing. And so I think that there's a lot of great organizations that are facilitating exactly this type of engagement. And if you are in any kind of leadership position or education position within your faith community, it's important that you start talking about this.
Hey, thank you so much. We have a couple questions and comments in the chat box going on.
Can I say
one
something?
really, sorry, who's there?
This is Libby Earle.
Oh, hi, yes, you commented earlier in the chat.
It was sort of hard to comment in the chat because the screen disappears and I couldn't listen and remember what I'd already typed. But I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and we happen to have Hopedale right there in Oxford, although I live in Hamilton. And so we have a big focus on we have principles rather than dogma of the interconnected web of life and respect for the interconnected web of life. And the national organization has a lot of environmental and resources. So if anybody wants to look at the UUA website, that's another resource.
Great. Could you maybe share a link in the chat for people to check out? Would you be able to do that? Yeah. Great. Thank you. There was it looks like one other comment sort of on the same, within the framework of talking about religious leadership. In the future, how do you see religious institutions at a larger scale increasing their role as a proponent of environmental stewardship? Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I just want to say, I mean, the initial impetus for this discussion was Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical on care for our common home, which we were thinking of having a study group for. And this discussion prompted me to finally go and read the Pope's encyclical. And it's beautiful. It's an incredible document coming from the very top of one of the largest organized religions on earth. And I think, and it's 5 years old. And it's been a big 5 years, but it's not a 5 years that has taken us in the direction that we need to be going until we had a virus that shut everything down. And so I think that one of the challenges is to have both the large scale visionary guidance like Laudato Si, but to really bring it down to a congregational level where we're seeing these types of practices to care for our common home and for each other within that context be built into our individual congregational practices, because otherwise it will be empty words. You know, I asked a friend of mine who was Catholic if she had read it, and she's someone who's a naturalist, and I thought that she would find it very powerful. And she said that no, after the clergy abuse scandal within the Catholic Church, she hadn't really cared to read much guidance from the upper levels of the church. And I think that that's just, it's so tragic, but it underlines the fact that this needs to be something cross-cutting, both from a high level of leadership, but also on a lived interrelational level.
Did anyone else have anything to add to that? Jason or Fatima, or even Becky, since she's she has taken some time studying Laudato Si, if she had any comments to add to what Carla just said.
Yeah, I can't speak too much because there's, secular
Right.
humanism and agnostic atheism doesn't really have a single group, and we don't go to sermons. We fulfill the roles of that social and connectedness in other ways. But that also makes it a little concerning, because there are many people who are becoming nuns, not affiliated with a religion. And so some of that is actually probably because, as Carla pointed out, because some of these faiths aren't addressing these issues. But some of it might be for other reasons. And if they don't find a way to organize and address this, we're going to be worse off for it. But I bet Becky actually can say a lot more on this topic. So I'm going to bow out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I read Laudato Si as soon as it came out, and I was so inspired and energized, and a lot was going on in the first year, a lot of study groups, a lot of action in different parishes. But sadly, the leadership in our country, i.e. the bishops, did not catch on to Laudato Si and did not encourage it. And so it kind of like it's up to the individual parishes. And that's been a real challenge and a big problem because, there are differences in parishes, of course, and to get people to even simply to recycle in the parish is not an easy thing to carry through a lot of the times. And frankly, I just keep plodding along and trying my best to promote Laudato Si. I've done that at St. Mary. It seems like, I've read some of their studies and some of their resolutions, and it's all there. It's beautiful. It's, 1, 2, 3, 4. I just, ran across it this week again. And, it gives all these suggestions about how, our individual parish could be like a model for others in our city. But I don't know, it's just tough. It's tough to get people to continue to work together on these issues. And I think it would help if the bishops would back this up. But I don't want to get political either, but there's politics here, so.
Thank you, Becky. We appreciate you weighing in. Looks like there are a couple more people who've had comments, and I might pronounce this name wrong, Saha or Saja. Are you still on the call? Looks like you are. It looks like she had a question earlier about whether or not we're taking any actions to prevent the environmental crisis in China. Did you want to speak a little more to that? Are you there? Hello? Okay, maybe not. Saha? Oh, hi. You are there. Did you want to share your comments or questions? I saw you posted a few things in the chat. You're welcome to speak. I mean, I can read what you wrote if you prefer that as well.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. There was a bit of a technical issue from my side. Thank you so much.
No
Yeah, I
problem.
was wondering, I mean, I believe with every crisis, there are gazillions of opportunities. And I wonder now there is a sort of a community awareness around the climate, the also responding to community needs against crises like COVID-19 and God knows what will come next in the future. I wonder if there is any action being taken through the interfaith groups to look into the strength among the different religion and responding to for example, sustainable cities, sustainable environments, sustainable resources, so we can really play or promote justice for the different generations. And with all the political calls to bring back industry to the US, are we thinking or taking any preventative action to really prevent the like repeating the environmental crisis of China to happen again in the US? So if there is any thinking to bring back different industries, are we thinking ahead to inform policy, probably utilizing the strength across the different religions within the US to inform them at least where these factories or wherever they should be located in a way that we could we prevent compromising human lives, but also we're responding to the shortages that we've realized with COVID-19 in terms of preparing for human needs moving forward. I don't know if my question clear enough.
So I think I can speak to a little bit of that, but they were good questions, but it was sort of many questions in one, I think. So I know we're going to have been trying, if you listen to the president, to bring back industry, but I don't think that's the case. And also it's very tricky because technically industry has increased in the US, but our proportion in the world has decreased. And because of automation, our employment in industry has decreased. And also on the big picture, I don't know if we're going to decrease industry, even if we do improve how we go forward in terms of climate change. I think what's more likely to happen is that we use technology to reduce our carbon footprint, and hopefully we do that intentionally, we build it in, and we really, really strongly, hopefully, incentivize reducing our carbon footprint through stuff like carbon taxation, and maybe a dividend from that. But I don't think there's much hope in terms of reducing industry going forward. At least that's my opinion. It would be great if we could, especially those industries that are most problematic. But if we don't have an alternative to them, then I don't know if that will happen. That's how I see things. And that's one of the reasons, renewable energy is obviously a big one. It's because it replaces what we currently have. It's not just a shutting down of what we currently have. But it's tricky. Did that answer at least some of your questions?
It did brilliantly, and I totally agree with you. Like, I'm not calling against like reopening industries in the U.S. and allowing more jobs and also responding to the needs. But I'm definitely advocate for the environment and not to compromise the human lives on the long run. and definitely renewable energy is one thing that we could all come together and probably advocate for. So yeah, thank you, Jason, appreciate it.
Carla, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, I just want to bring up that one of the things I think that a thinker who I find helpful, who's not in the Christian tradition in this department, is Joanna Macy, and she's famous for a body of work called Work That Reconnects, and her books are very helpful. But one of the things that she talks about is the importance of experiencing grief. She comes from more of a Buddhist tradition, but you know, for me, as I think just returning to where I started, I experience a lot of frustration and sadness around these issues. Like when I think about China and the degradation of the environment in China because of heavy industry, to me, it reminds me just so much of the industrial legacy that happened here in the United States. It strikes me as just being a duplication of our own 18th and 19th and 20th century history. For years, I worked in brownfield cleanup, where we cleaned up contaminated waste sites. And it was very depressing to see, once industries go out of business, how there was no money to do some of this type of cleanup and remediation. And one of the things I kept thinking to myself is, I hope that someone in China understands the damage that some of these things do, because it's like the cat in the hat, like something gets out of the bag and you just can't put it back in. But I don't really, I'm sure that's not what's happened. You know, we just kind of keep duplicating these same extractive, short-looking, profit-driven types of behaviors. And so for me, in a spiritual practice, it is really important to be able to express my sadness about this, and to at times not feel obligated to be hopeful about these issues, because you know, in order to do what I think is ethically right, which is to continue to try to be a good advocate and a good soldier on this cause, I need opportunities to express the grief that I feel about this situation. And I think that is a place where our faith traditions, you know, are often very helpful, is in understanding sadness as well as joy.
Thank you so much, Carla. We had another question and comment here from Christina Mcguire. Are you still on the line, Christina?
Carla sent a link.
Hey.
I thought it was actually. Oh, I should.
It is, but I think I would love to hear from a youth perspective on this and the questions that you had, especially being raised Catholic. So please go ahead.
All right. So yeah, I guess yeah, it is kind of funny too, because like I don't know what to say. Okay. Anyway, yeah, a lot of times, like, I think our generation in general, like, wants to problem solve and like wants to find this like solution. And as you guys have been saying, I think we are a little bit too hopeful. Like, everyone kind of, because we've all been taught, and I think Carla really would have a pretty good perspective on this, because she mentioned it about her kids too, is how like it's all like you're focusing on your path in life essentially, and it's like, okay, well, if I can fulfill my purpose and I want to change the world, then that means I'm gonna fix the environment problem on my own with no help at all, which is not gonna happen. But like, I sometimes talk to my grandfather, right? And he has years and years of science experience, and he was like a chemist, and we'll talk about like, he'll talk about the sort of science behind it, and I'll talk about just like the common sense problem solving. And sometimes we'll just come up with like kind of BS-y type ideas, and like, you know, I mean, it's good just to talk about it, because sometimes if it just gets out there somehow, and someone's like, hey, that's not kind of just a joke, like that's actually like a good idea, maybe we'll do something someday, you know.
Thanks. And you also said you had a question on what Laudato Si is. Becky, did you wanna respond to that, to explain to her a little bit from the Catholic perspective?
Sure. Laudato Si is a letter, or we call it an encyclical, written by the Pope, who speaks about issues in our time. Like, for instance, the very first encyclicals on social justice were all about industry and workers' rights, and so this particular document stems from the fact that we have sorely misinterpreted scripture for so long about our position around creation, and that is that instead of being stewards or caretakers of creation, we've set ourselves up as being manipulators and using creation to our advantage. And the Pope, who is a scientist himself, sets up a framework out of which he encourages people to take a look at the reality of our connectedness, at the reality of what's going on in the world, like around water, around people who live in poverty have no water, how all of our actions are circling out and affect each other, and how we ought to watch out for each other rather than continue this cycle of using and abusing, and you know, the consumerism. He speaks against, you know, this need to consume and to have more and more and more, which has encouraged me, by the way, to become a minimalist. I try. It's tough in this society to do that, but I think I've followed his lead, and I'm kind of happy about that. But that's so individualistic, you know. It has to be shared by all of us. I think, you know, this encyclical led me to also be aware of you know, when something is produced, for instance, like this computer that is before me, has an end to it, and where does it go? And that just, I don't know, it just discourages me. And Carla, you were talking about maybe at the end of this, maybe we'll take a look at the airport, you know, the airplanes, airports, the use of travel that way. Maybe we'll look at these cruise liners, and maybe we'll use less of that or none of that. And that was so, I was so lighthearted when you said that, but then when I took a look at what really goes on in the world, I think we're just going to return to as per usual. And I don't know exactly what to say about it. I mean, I encourage youth to talk about values and the values that come out of Laudato Si, but I'm pretty discouraged myself. And talk about weeping, I've done a lot of that over the climate and over a lot of issues that aren't addressed. I
think that kind of,
I'm sorry.
I think that kind of, sorry. I think that kind of speaks a little bit to what Christina was saying. If I'm reading from just her comments in the chat, that there's a lot of concern, even among the youth, but there's no responsibility. So how do we make that connection between concern and taking responsibility for ourselves and our actions? I don't know if I'm understanding where you were trying to go with your comments, Christina, correctly, or if there was a specific question, but.
Yeah, like a lot of times we'll start talking about like, hey, there's this and this and this that needs to be fixed, but then, people don't really step up and do the work, and then we'll talk about how no one else is stepping up and doing the work, but then we still don't do it. But and I think that kind of is everybody, but again, I notice it more with the people I'm around most of the time. But I don't know what I'm saying again. I said that before, but yeah. And then with the responsibility thing, I mean, I think a lot of times we're like, oh, well, the people before this did this to us, like we're doomed now, it's their fault. And it's like, no. If you have a problem, you have to take care of that problem. Doesn't even matter how it got to you. Like if you have a genetic problem that you inherited from your parents, you can't blame your parents. You have to take care of yourself. And then like, you can't just be like, oh, I got this from you. It's your fault because you gave me those genes. Like what? But yeah. And like we all inherited this planet from each other, and we have to take care of it. And kind of like, I forget who mentioned it. It might have been, is your name Jason? Like mentioned the bigger picture idea and how like we really do have to come together and see this all as a we, as an us, not an I individual thing. And I think that's something people in general they shouldn't have trouble with. And that's the kind of funny thing, is that's our natural programming, is to be inclined to groups. But then we've kind of diverted from that and become these like individual entities, when we kind of have to clump back together and go backwards, because that's what we need right now. We need that group system, not group think, but like, coming together and collaborating.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Jason or Carla, do either of you have a response for how we might kind of get to that point of collaboration that she's talking about?
So I want to hear what Jason has to say, but I do just want to say, I think that your comments are so spot on, and that, I mean, I am a believer in everybody in their myriad different ways in which their faith traditions and their communities speak to them, to be working to engage with these issues, and fighting the real fight of not being overwhelmed by them, as we often become. And I don't have a ton of tips for that, because sometimes I end up getting really overwhelmed, but it is helpful for me to think about a resilience framework when I think about this. So as you say, I love your metaphor. Like, it's like being born with a genetic disease. Like, this is what we have. And our goal is to make our world, our natural ecosystems, our communities as strong and as resilient as they can be to help us weather these storms. And that can be so many different things. It can be the types of reaching out to your neighbors that hopefully we're all trying to do right now in the middle of the current crisis. It can be, just taking some time to cut down some honeysuckle when you find yourself out in a natural area. It can be learning the names of your native bees. There are so many ways that we can build resilience and connection with our environment, and to really promote those ideas in the networks and in the communities that you belong to. You don't have to do everything, as you were saying. You don't have to be the one individual that solves everything, but we can all model how we can do better in our communities, and to talk about the great meaning that we get from these things.
And I can speak a little to that. Yeah, we need mass action. It's not enough individually to do our parts. which is great and is necessary because we can't ask of others what we're not willing to ask of ourselves. So I think things you just mentioned, Carla and Becky, living a minimalist lifestyle, that is fantastic and it contributes. And mass action, of course, is made of individuals. But if we don't pull other people along with us, we won't get the level of action that we need accomplished to actually make a difference. And we're talking about not just individual stuff, but like institutional, international change. This has to be huge. And so it's very discouraging knowing that we could even, as individuals, sort of play our part, and it might not be enough. But of course, we at the bare minimum need to do that just to be able to ask it of others. And then we need to really try to, pull communities together to act on this. I will say, I'll give 2 points of hope. And one's a little bit dangerous. And one is that our capacity as humans for innovation and invention and finding solutions is pretty fantastic. And there's a chance that our technological developments, even though it got us in this situation, might actually be able to pull us out. The problem is we can't count on that. We absolutely should not count on that saving us, even though it might be. And also it might not happen unless we have the communal mass action to put the funding into developing the technologies that might help that, carbon capture and many other things I won't go into, but there's a lot of possible solutions out there if we have the political will and drive to actually try to look for them and accomplish this. And the other thing I'll say is, again, going back to the crisis we're in, the virus, one thing that is hopeful to me is the fact that we say, we don't have the money, we can't do that, we couldn't do that, it would hurt the economy, we can't do that. But then when a crisis happens, what are we doing? Well, we're throwing $2 trillion at it, right? Well, it's the same thing with climate change. And so if people could hopefully get in their heads that, one, it pays off in the long term, and two, this isn't that new. When there's crises, we respond with massive amounts of effort and capital and will to fix it. Now, if we could just look at that in the long term, even though we're experiencing right now, the whole thing's just stretched out over a long period of time, and it's only going to get worse. But if we could realize that and say, hey, it's not only is it responsible in the short term to put that much money towards it, that ultimately it will save us money. And the bigger point, it will save lives and it will save humanity in a way in terms of the burden that we will all experience from the grief that will happen from the repercussions of climate change in terms of conflict and strife and hunger and drought and famine and resources, just all these things. And so we need to act on it now. And hopefully this crisis can make us realize that we can do this. It not only won't hurt us long-term, it will help us long-term in all the other facets, not just in terms of the climate. So between those two things, I hope that's a little bit of hope. But honestly, I'm a person who believes in, even if it's futile, if it's got value, if it's got meaning to it, you fight for it anyway. And I don't think this is futile, but even if things feel that way, fight on. That's the way to approach it. But that's me coming from a sort of an existentialist position. So.
Thank you so much, Jason. Did anyone else have any comments they wanted to add, or did that sort of answer your maybe questions and concerns, Christina? Is there anything else you wanted to say? Yeah. It looks like Libby had some comments regarding something Carla said about grief. Did you want to share those, Libby?
Henry Nouwen, he's deceased now. He's was a Roman Catholic priest, and it was written extensively. He was so I get this straight. In Canada, he was running a home for extremely developmentally disabled people, and his concept was that these were people who were worthy of love, and despite their disabilities. But one of the things that he said in dealing with how how to cope with tragedy and the bad stuff that happens in the world. And his reference was a reference to Jesus and the Passion story of "Let this cup pass from me," and he had a sermon on that. And the cup was essentially life, and you don't get to just have the cream off the top of the cup. You get the dregs in the cup too. So life is good and bad, but for me, that sort of removed the either or, the need that they both must exist together. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Definitely, thank you. Did anyone have any comments? Carla, did you?
I just wanted to say thank you, and I'll check that out. And yeah, I think we sometimes don't make enough space for ourselves to be sad in our culture, or to kind of, we're really challenged by that. And that is something that I will say for Christianity, we definitely have a framework for experiencing kind of like the tragedy of mortal pain as part of our, since it's Holy Week, I'll mention that, that there are frameworks. I'm grateful for the frameworks that we have where we can experience sadness, and that we're allowed to do that. So I look forward to reading that book. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
It looks like Patricia had comments about another book as well. Did you want to sort of share those comments with the group, Patricia? Are you still there? Patricia, are you on the line?
Yes, sorry. Looks like
Okay, no problem.
So I thought it was a good book to have divided into sections and talked about. It gave a lot of perspectives in the past about how things had, different movements had come across. And basically was talking about how if we're thinking about God's creation being earth, we should really be thinking about that as a priority for any faith-based organization, to be saying that we should be protecting the earth as God's gift to us.
Thank you. And that was called Climate Church, Climate World, How People of Faith Must Work for Change. If you didn't see that in the chat, I'm not sure if everyone's reading along. So did anyone else have any questions? I think those are the last comments I see in the chat. So did anyone have anything else they wanted to comment on or add before we wrap up?
I might be able to add one small thing. I know some people from religious tradition, because God created the earth, they kind of feel it's invulnerable to our actions, and that He will take care of us regardless, or that it's hubris to think that we might be able to alter it in ways that could hurt us or the environment. And I'm glad to know that that's not the majority position of many people in religious communities, but I do think it's a dangerous one that kind of relieves us from responsibility for our actions. And so that's something that we need to be cautious of. And I really do appreciate the idea that if you believe in a higher power and the higher power created this for us, that it's sort of our responsibility to take care of it for ourselves, for respect for the Creator, and for everyone else that has to live under it, human and non-human. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Jason. Carla, do you have any closing comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think in preparing for this, I kind of dug into trying to understand some of those questions, got in over my head a little bit theologically, those questions about, who has power? Is God present? Does he or she protect us? Or, it gets into some pretty deep theological waters. And it is really interesting to hear different people have to say related to those theories. But I think the thing that is, it did take me into some like really powerful and interesting reading, which I'd be happy to like share with you so that you can send it out as a link, or put it on our website or something like that, related to kind of Christian thinking and just general Judeo-Christian thinking about end times, eschatology, and theories of why we should act in the face of certain demise, and whether we try to make heaven appear on earth through our actions, or whether we just might as well hasten to the end. And there's no doubt that there are many conflicting and confusing interpretations of those things run rampant in our cultural practice of religion in this country, that I think are often very counterproductive to our achieving a livable climate for the future. And so I think it is really important for us to just continue dialogues like this, where we talk about the many ways in which our faith motivates us to action, versus having us sort of step back from that sense of action. So thank you so much again for hosting this call. And I just love the work that Interfaith Center is doing on this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. And thank you to both of you for participating and being panelists and offering your insight. We really appreciate it. Do any of our participants have any additional comments before we wrap up? Just want to make sure everyone's heard. No? Okay. Well, then I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us today and taking this hour and a half out of your day to talk about what we feel is a very important issue. We do have another talk coming up on climate change. It's actually called Climate Change, Poverty, and Refugees. It's all connected, and it's from a Catholic perspective with Sister CJ Willie, and she's actually been involved with the United Nations. And so we're really looking forward to that, and we hope that if you enjoyed this discussion today, that you might consider joining us for that one as well, and exploring this issue from another angle. And we hope to continue having these dialogues. I'm actually kind of glad we had a smaller group so that we could sort of see people and interact and hear from you all in a more personal way. And I hope that that's sort of a platform we can continue in the future. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting the Interfaith Center. And we hope you all stay safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of your week.